Welcome to today's deep dive. So picture this. You're sitting at the head of a conference table, or, maybe you're looking out at a circle of folding chairs in a community center.
Or even staring down a grid of silent squares on a video call.
Oh yeah, the worst one. And you ask a question to the group, and then just nothing.
Pure, agonizing, dead air.
Exactly. You feel that sweat start to prickle on the back of your neck, your fight or flight response kicks in, and I feel like most leaders in that exact moment, they think the cure for that silence is to just ask a smarter question.
Right, or a louder one.
Yeah. But the science of facilitation shows the magic actually happens in the 5 seconds after someone gives you a pretty mediocre answer.
The instinct during dead air is just almost universal. We panic. I mean, we assume the silence is a direct reflection of our own competence.
Like we're failing in real time.
Exactly. So we start rapid-firing new questions, rephrasing, pleading, just trying to spark something, anything. But today, we are opening up a highly practical document. It's an instructional design framework, specifically O2-A.P.L.E. rhythm.docs.
Yeah, and the mission today is to completely unpack this concrete toolbox so you can facilitate any group discussion like an absolute pro.
Because this document completely dismantles that panic instinct. It's called the A.P.P.L.E. rhythm, and it proves that a great discussion, well, it doesn't rely on a leader performing some endless monologue of brilliant inquiries.
Right.
It relies on a very specific set of mechanical steps you take to manage the energy of the room.
To make this really concrete for you listening, think about a stagnant discussion like a stalled car.
Right.
When there's dead air, the panicked leader just keeps turning the ignition key over and over again.
Flooding the engine.
Yes, flooding the engine with more questions instead of checking the mechanics to actually get the engine running.
And eventually letting the car drive itself.
Exactly. So fixing that stalled car has to start with the ignition moment, which brings us to the first 2 steps of the framework. Ask and pause.
So the ask phase, it seems incredibly straightforward, but the psychology behind it actually trips up a lot of experienced professionals.
How so?
Well, the goal here is just to launch with a clear question that is easy to enter. Not too broad, not too narrow. The trap leaders fall into is trying to sound profound.
Oh, like they're trying to prove why they're the one leading the meeting.
Exactly. They ask this multi-part philosophical question because they want to demonstrate their own expertise. But the mindset at this stage, it has to be entirely stripped of ego.
Yeah.
Your only objective is to get the first voice in the room to speak. You just need the spark.
It's really about lowering the barrier to entry. Like, if you ask people to solve the ultimate mystery of the universe on the first try, they're going to freeze.
Every time.
But if you ask them something accessible, you get that first voice. But getting the question out of your mouth is only half the battle of the ignition phase, right?
Right. The immediate next step, the pause, is where the real psychological warfare happens.
Right.
The instruction is to ask your question and then silently count for 3 to 5 seconds and do absolutely nothing.
Okay, wait. I have to push back on this a little bit. Because from personal experience, 5 seconds of silence when a whole room of people is just staring at you, that feels like an absolute eternity.
Oh, it does. It absolutely does. Doing nothing is often the hardest part of leadership because when you're the one standing at the front of the room, time just sort of distorts.
It slows down to a crawl.
It really does. The adrenaline of being the focal point makes 5 seconds feel like 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And you start to interpret that silence as failure.
Right, you think, oh no, they hate my question. They think I'm an idiot.
Exactly. But what is actually happening in the minds of your participants during those 5 seconds is this massive amount of cognitive processing.
What are they doing in that time?
They're decoding your words. They're searching their own memory banks. They're formulating an opinion, filtering it through their own insecurities.
Oh, that makes sense.
And then, crucially, they are assessing the social risk of actually saying it out loud in front of their peers. That entire sequence takes time.
So silence equals thinking, not failure.
Precisely. The framework insists that your internal monologue during this pause must be, do not rescue them.
Oh, wow. Do not rescue them.
Right. Because when you jump in to break the silence just because you feel uncomfortable, you might think you're throwing the group a life raft. But in reality, you're just cutting off their thought process right as they're about to speak.
And during that pause, cures 2 very specific destructive leader archetypes that the framework talks about.
Yes, it does.
The first one is the nervous talker. And I know we have all been in a meeting with this person.
Oh, absolutely.
They are so terrified of dead air that they fill every empty second with their own voice. They ask a question, wait like 1 second, and then say, or, maybe it's this, or maybe it's that.
Yeah, they end up suffocating the room because nobody else can get a word in edgewise.
Right. And the second archetype is the lecturer.
Yes, the lecturer. This is the facilitator who asks a question, waits a beat, and then just provides the answer themselves.
Which is so frustrating as a participant.
It is, because when you do that, you are actively training your audience to be passive. You're teaching them that if they just hold out long enough, you'll do the heavy lifting for them.
It ceases to be a discussion and basically becomes a speech with intermittent pop quizzes.
Exactly. So forcing yourself to endure that 5-second pause, it forces the group to take ownership of the silence.
Okay, so we ask the accessible question, we bite our tongues, and survive the sheer eternity of the pause, and eventually somebody caves. Someone breaks the silence and speaks. The engine turns over.
We have ignition.
Right. Now, a lot of leaders treat that first answer like a checkpoint on a to-do list. Like, someone spoke, great, check the box, let's move on to the next topic.
Which is the worst thing you can do.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because if we want to build a deep discussion, we can't just abandon that initial spark. We have to stick with it. And this is where the probe mechanic comes in.
Right. So the P in A.P.P.L.E. probing focuses entirely on staying with that very first answer. The cardinal rule here is to suspend your judgment.
Meaning what, exactly?
Meaning you don't evaluate the answer immediately, and you absolutely do not jump to your next prepared question. The goal is strictly to deepen that one person's initial contribution by getting them to explain their rationale.
So probing is really just forcing yourself to be curious instead of judgmental.
Yes.
Because when someone gives an answer, the instinct is great point, or, I'm not sure I agree with that. But any kind of evaluation, even positive evaluation, kind of kills the psychological safety.
It does. It signals to the room that you are a judge handing out scores.
Right. So instead, probing uses phrases like, what makes you say that? Or, can you expand on that?
Exactly. You are honoring the courage it took for them to break the silence by showing genuine interest in their thought process.
Which feels great for the person speaking.
It feels incredibly validating. And by doing so, you avoid becoming our third problematic archetype, the interrogator.
Oh, the interrogator.
Yeah. The interrogator treats a discussion like a rapid-fire cross-examination. They get an answer, they fire another question at a different topic, they get an answer, they pivot again.
The participants just feel like they're dodging dodgeballs rather than building an idea.
Exactly. Probing slows the tempo down. It treats an answer as a conversation starter, not a finish line.
If we use a camera analogy here, probing is like taking your zoom lens and zooming all the way in on a specific detail in one person's photograph.
Oh, I like that.
You're trying to see the texture of what they just said, really understanding the deep why behind their initial thought.
That's a great way to look at it. And to take that camera analogy a step further, if you only ever use the zoom lens, your audience loses the context of the whole picture.
Right.
I mean, you've dug deep into this one person's brain, but if you stop there, you're alienating the rest of the room. You end up conducting a highly detailed one-on-one interview in front of a live studio audience.
And everyone else just checks out, looks at their phones.
Exactly. We have to shatter that isolated bubble and force the rest of the room to carry the weight.
And that transition is the loop, the L in our A.P.P.L.E. framework.
Yeah.
This is how you deliberately transfer the energy away from you and the speaker and push it out to the collective group.
Right. Looping is the bridge that turns an interview into a true discussion.
So how does it actually work mechanically?
Well, after you've probed someone's answer to understand their logic, you physically and verbally turn to the rest of the participants. You ask something like, what do the rest of you think about that? Or do others see it differently?
So you're throwing it to the crowd.
Exactly. The framework calls this bouncing the idea. You take the statement person A just made, and you bounce it over to person B, C, and D to react to.
And this directly cures the ping-pong leader archetype, right?
Yes, it does.
Because that's the facilitator who acts like the hub of a wheel. The conversation always has to route back through them. Like, leader talks to person A talks to leader talks to person B talks to leader.
It is exhausting for the facilitator.
It really is. Looping cuts the leader out of the middle and encourages person A and person B to start talking directly to each other. You're weaving a web of interaction instead of maintaining a wheel.
That's spot on. Now, the framework also introduces a more targeted variation of the loop, which is called pouncing.
Okay, pouncing.
Yeah. So while bouncing throws the idea to the entire room for anyone to grab, pouncing is a gentle, deliberate invitation to the quieter members. The phrasing suggested is something like, anyone who hasn't spoken yet want to add to this?
I have to admit, the word pouncing sounds a little aggressive, and it triggers my own anxiety just hearing it.
I get that.
Because if someone in the room is quiet, they're usually quiet for a reason. Like they might be an internal processor, or maybe they just hate public speaking. Doesn't singling them out risk making them freeze up like a deer in headlights?
It's a valid concern. The biological fear of public speaking is very real, which is why the execution of a pounce must be an invitation, not a spotlight.
Okay, so how do we avoid the spotlight?
You are not pointing a finger and saying, John, what is the answer? That's a pop quiz, and it will absolutely trigger their fight or flight response.
Yeah, John would panic.
Right. But when you say, anyone who hasn't spoken yet want to add, you are clearing social space. Because introverts often struggle to find a gap in the conversation when louder external processors are dominating. By pouncing gently, the leader acts as a traffic cop. Holding up a stop sign to the loud voices and creating a safe, designated lane for the quiet processors to merge into the conversation if they choose to.
I love that. You're giving them permission to speak without having to fight for the microphone.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've asked a question, paused for the silence, probed the first answer to get the deep rationale, and looped the rest of the room in to react to it. The group is finally engaged.
Right.
But now we need to push the collective group into new territory so the conversation doesn't just stall out again. And that is the extend the E in A.P.P.L.E.
Yes. Extending pushes the boundaries of the current thought, while probing looks backward at the rationale, why someone thinks a certain way. Extending looks forward at the implications.
So it asks, where does this idea lead?
Exactly. You're challenging the room with follow-ups like, if that is true, what are the implications for our project? Or how would this apply in a completely different scenario?
Going back to our camera lens, if probing was zooming all the way in to see the texture, extending is panning the camera all the way out to see the entire landscape.
Perfect analogy.
You want to see what surrounds the idea, how it interacts with the broader world.
Yes. Both the vertical depth of the probe and the horizontal breadth of the extend are necessary. But what makes this framework so powerful is that these verbal mechanics do not exist in a vacuum.
Right.
The psychological safety of a room is dictated just as much by physical presence as it is by the words being spoken. The framework outlines several critical mechanics regarding the physical energy, what they call the vibe of the leader.
This is fascinating to me because we rarely think about our bodies when we are worried about our discussion questions.
We really don't.
But the physical posture you adopt completely changes how your audience interprets your words. Like if you are standing behind a podium gripping the edges, or if you're sitting stiffly at the absolute head of a long boardroom table, you are projecting authority.
You're subconsciously telling the room, I am the judge, and you are here to be evaluated.
Exactly.
A podium acts as a literal shield. It creates a physical barrier that reinforces that ping-pong leader dynamic we talked about. The framework advises leaders to actively dismantle those barriers.
So what should they do instead?
Sit down if you can. Lean forward. Keep your posture open. And most importantly, manage your eye contact.
Eye contact is huge.
It is. When someone is speaking, our instinct is to lock eyes with them exclusively. But the framework suggests you actively look around the room at the people who are not speaking. Because when you do that, you're communicating something profound.
Oh, that's really smart.
Yeah.
You are transferring the social pressure. Because if I'm a participant and I see the leader looking at me while someone else is talking, my brain stays engaged because I subconsciously realize I might be pulled into the conversation next.
Exactly.
It physically loops the room together before a verbal loop is even spoken. It basically tells everyone, we're all responsible for this conversation.
It keeps the entire room on standby. Now, having all these individual tools, ask, pause, probe, loop, extend, and the physical vibe, it's only effective if you know how to sequence them.
Right.
The real engine of a great discussion is the cycle. The default cycle most untrained leaders fall back on is entirely linear. Ask a question, get an answer, ask the next question.
It's a straight line that just burns through material and totally exhausts the facilitator.
Exactly. But the A.P.P.L.E cycle is designed to be a continuous loop. You ask, you pause, you get that first voice, you probe to understand it, you loop to involve the room, you extend to see the implications.
And then instead of asking a brand new question, you stay in the loop.
Yes. You take the new insight and you loop the room again. You extend it further. The ultimate instruction for the leader here is to linger.
To linger. I love that word for this.
Lingering is where the collective wisdom of the group actually surfaces. You do not need a list of 50 brilliant, meticulously crafted questions to fill an hour.
Which is such a relief.
It is. You need one solid entry question and the willingness to linger in the A.P.P.L.E cycle for 20 minutes. It removes an immense burden of performance off the shoulders of the leader.
I think the best way to prove how this removes the pressure is to actually hear the mechanics in action.
Let's do it.
Yeah, we need to demonstrate what this cycle sounds like when it flows naturally, without pausing to announce every step. So let's run a quick scenario. I'll facilitate and you be a participant. We'll use a mundane topic like a team postmortem on communication.
Okay, sounds good. Let's run it.
All right, here we go. So what is one specific bottleneck slowing down our team's communication right now?
Well, I think we are using way too many different messaging apps. It's just confusing.
That's interesting. What makes you say that it's confusing?
Well, half the team sends project updates via email, and the other half drops them into a Slack channel. I spend half my morning just trying to track down where the latest file actually lives.
Ah, I see the split. Do the rest of you feel that same friction between email and Slack in your daily workflow?
And we can pause the role play right there.
Nice.
That was maybe 30 seconds of dialogue, but it completely bypassed all the traps we discussed today.
Yeah, let's break down exactly what happened there. I started with a very accessible ask. What is one bottleneck? I didn't ask for a comprehensive audit of our IT infrastructure, right? I just asked for one bottleneck.
Right.
And then the pause. I stayed silent. You felt the dead air. And you stepped in to fill it with a decent but slightly vague answer about messaging apps.
And instead of saying, good point, and moving on to the next person, you probed. You stayed neutral and asked for the rationale. You forced me to explain why it was confusing.
Which brought out the actual root cause, the split between email and Slack.
Exactly.
And once we had that root cause, I didn't try to solve it with you right then and there. I looped the room. I took your specific friction point and bounced it to the rest of the group to see if it was an isolated issue or a systemic one.
And if we had kept going, once the group agreed it was a problem, you could have extended the conversation by asking, if we consolidated to just one platform, what are the implications for our external client communications?
Right. The flow is just incredibly natural. It does not sound like a rigid academic framework when applied. It just sounds like a facilitator who is deeply curious and highly attentive to the group's dynamics.
It really does. But there is a final, highly practical consideration here. You can't linger forever.
True.
A crucial skill in facilitation is recognizing when the cycle has finally run its course.
So how do you know when it is finally time to pull the plug and move to the next topic? Because if you linger too long, the energy goes flat and you end up just beating a dead horse.
You watch for the indicators. You move on only when the physical energy in the room noticeably drops, like people start leaning back, checking out, looking at their watches.
Yeah.
Or you listen for repetition. When participants start agreeing with each other using slightly different words, but no new information is actually being added, the vein has been fully mined.
All right.
Or simply when the key insights you needed have clearly surfaced.
And when you hit that point, you don't just abruptly change the subject and induce whiplash.
No, definitely not.
You have to close the loop properly. You summarize briefly. You say something like, so what we've uncovered here is that the split between email and Slack is eating up our mornings, and we need a unified standard.
Yes.
You wrap up the core takeaways, and only then do you introduce the next initial ask.
Yeah.
It gives the group a sense of closure. It honors the mental work they just did.
That sense of accomplishment is vital for maintaining momentum over a long meeting or class. If people feel like their contributions just disappear into the ether without being acknowledged, they will stop contributing. Summarizing before transitioning cements the value of the discussion.
So we have built a complete concrete toolbox today, the A.P.P.L.E framework.
Really have.
You ask a clear, simple question to spark the engine. You pause, enduring the silence, to let their brains process the social risk. You probe the first answer to deepen the logic without evaluating it.
Right.
You loop the room in to shatter the one-on-one bubble and weave a web of conversation. And you extend the idea to push the group into new territory.
And you adjust your vibe to be open and collaborative.
Yes, you linger in the cycle, you summarize, and then you move on.
It is a phenomenal shift in perspective. And whether you are running a corporate strategy meeting, leading a volunteer community group, or teaching a class full of students, the underlying human psychology is exactly the same.
It's universal.
It is. We all fear silence, and we all fear judgment. This framework gives you a systematic safety net to manage those fears. It cures the nervous talker, the lecturer, the interrogator, and the ping pong leader inside all of us.
We spend so much time in leadership gripping the steering wheel, turning the ignition key over and over, trying to force the engine to turn over with our own sheer energy and intellect.
Yeah.
But I want to leave you with this final thought to mull over as you prepare for your next big meeting or small group. If the true success of a discussion relies almost entirely on the mechanics of what happens after that initial spark, could it be that the greatest tool a leader has isn't their own voice? Maybe the true mark of a master facilitator is their willingness to completely surrender control of the room to the participants themselves. The best way to get the car moving isn't to keep turning the key, but to step back, manage the flow, and finally let the engine run on its own.